for joining us at the fourth of several community forums as we prepare to host the third and final official Democratic mayoral primary debate right here at 30 Rock on June 16th. We here at NBC New York will be hosting the debate in person in conjunction with our partners in this, the New York City Campaign Finance Board, and at Telemundo, Politico, the New York Urban League, and the Citizens Budget Commission. The point of tonight's program is to give you, the voters, an opportunity to tell us what you want to hear from the candidates who want to be mayor, and also to talk about critical issues affecting our city's economic recovery. So let's get started. I'm joined for this very important discussion by Andrew Ryan, who's the president of the Citizens Budget Commission. We're lucky to have Andrew's expertise in framing this conversation as one of our official debate partners this year. Andrew brings 25 years of experience managing complex finances and service delivery, both in nonprofits and inside government agencies. He's served as the associate director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and as chief operating officer of the New York City Department of Health, overseeing its $1.6 billion budget. We also have with us tonight Jessica Walker. She's the president and the CEO of the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, an organization that represents and supports the business community throughout the borough. She's a public policy expert who previously worked at the Partnership for New York City. So Jessica really understands many of the challenges facing our businesses right now. She's also served in senior leadership roles with the New York Academy of Medicine and United Neighborhood Houses. And she's been appointed by Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio to advisory councils that are working to restart the economy, specifically in the wake of COVID-19. Dr. James Parrott is the Director of Economic and Fiscal Policy at the Center for New York City Affairs at the New School. He brings more than 30 years of experience in city economic and fiscal issues, having worked in city and state government, as well as in the private sector. He's taught public policy and labor economics at CUNY and recently served as chief economist of the Fiscal Policy Institute. He serves on Governor Cuomo's Tax Reform and Fairness Commission, writes about tax policy, as well as city and state budgets and income inequality. If you're joining us live, you can send us your questions and comments by emailing them to us at debate@nbcnewyork.com. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible during our short time together. And we would like to begin tonight's conversation focusing on the city's recovery from COVID. And I'd like to do a quick lightning round of sorts, if that's possible, beginning with you, Jessica Walker. Tell us what you see as the biggest obstacle to solving the unemployment crisis that's facing our city. Is it a lack of available childcare? Is it enhanced federal benefits, keeping people at the lower end of the income scale at home? Or is it fear of crime or something else? We'll begin with you, Jessica.
It's honestly, it's all of those things. And that's why, the mayor, our next mayor, is going to have such a difficult task ahead of him or her. The big thing is, listen, it's such an ecosystem. We need to bring back our tourists, such a big part of our economy. We need to continue to really fight for New York City to be competitive and to bring back our remote workers so that they don't feel that they need to go to other states and that they can do work elsewhere. So this is very complicated. There are so many moving parts, but at the end of the day, it is about really trying to prop up our small businesses, making sure that we are doing everything we can to address public safety issues, which I know we'll talk a little bit about tonight. But it's really about just making sure that New York City is bouncing back in not just in a way that that people feel, but also that people perceive. That's something we can talk more about tonight.
We'll definitely talk more about that. I'm going to come back to you to talk about what you're hearing from businesses and on the ground. Andrew Ryan, what do you see as the biggest obstacle right now?
Well, the biggest obstacle is anything that's holding us back from growth. It's about the economy. Government can do many things at the local level, but it's about the economy. And what do we need? We need public safety. We need vaccination, and we need government to function well so that when people come back to their offices, when tourists come to New York, they want to be here. They want to enjoy all New York has to offer. People come here to be together for that excitement. Anything that holds that back is the obstacle, but there are plenty of federal programs, there are state programs, and if we can continue to get the pandemic under control, improve public safety, and get government functioning well for New Yorkers, we'll be on our way.
Dr. Parrott?
Thank you. I think the things Jessica and Andrew talked about are really important. In addition, I think one thing that would help the economy recover quicker is if we had a wage subsidy program that would help both small businesses that are, many are really struggling to hold on, as well as get workers back into the workforce sooner rather than later. We obviously need a lot of the supports that government can provide for childcare and public safety. We need a creative way to bring back the arts industry. That's really important to the quality of life in New York City. Going forward, we need to be attentive to the employment and training needs of a workforce. We've seen during the pandemic that economic changes that were underway before have been rapidly accelerated, greater use of technology. We need to figure out how to help workers and companies adapt to that. We probably won't get back all of the jobs that we lost. New York City was hit much harder than the nation overall. Our job losses were 2.5 times greater than the national average. Many workers will be stranded without an employer to go back to. We need to identify those workers and train them for the skills needed in the jobs that will be growing in the future. I think fundamentally, the New York City economy is very strong. There will be job growth. It will occur in different areas than what we've seen. We need to make sure that our workforce is skilled and can capture those jobs.
I'd like to talk a little more specifically about what the challenges are that certain businesses are facing. Jessica, can you get us started by sharing what you're hearing from the businesses that you work with on the ground? Who's hit the hardest? Who's climbing out of this more quickly? And what concerns are those businesses looking to their next mayor to address?
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, part of it is that, a lot of times small businesses don't always feel heard. So just to be able to talk about this is a big deal. So obviously the businesses most affected were those that were face-to-face, right? So restaurants and retail, you hear less about gyms and dance studios and small art galleries. Those have really been affected. What's interesting is that we've seen a lot of those staff members at some of those businesses leave the city, right? So, we had a lot of people who were actors and dancers who were moonlighting in the restaurant industry as waiters and waitresses. And so when the crisis hit, a lot of them left. And that's why it's been so hard for many industries to be able to rehire. So that's a huge problem. But I think that, listen, I'll mix my metaphors here. We're the end of the tunnel is in sight, but we're not out of the woods yet. I think that James can tell you through his research that, New York City has been hit harder than most places in the nation. And because, we were so hit in tourism and because of our workforce has gone elsewhere for the most part. And so this is a long road to recovery. I think that small businesses are very optimistic at this moment, but I think there's a great fear of what lies ahead in terms of many have accumulated a great deal of debt. So I think that this is a longer, this is going to have to be a longer recovery than I think some people are planning for, thinking about. And that's what we need the next mayor to really plan for.
So that brings us to the question of what can a mayor really do about these issues? James, help us understand, is there a sense that help is on the way and that the candidates for mayor are focused on the types of strategies that they can A, control, and B, that might work?
So there's certainly been a lot of talk in the debates and, in their everyday encounters with reporters and voters about the economy. So the candidates clearly understand that that's a big issue. I'm not sure, though, that they have, a really close understanding of what's needed. Likely because it's very hard to develop a really nuanced picture of what the economic challenges are. They will soon enough encounter that. We really need to, if we're going to avoid the really unfortunate and I think avoidable outcomes that we've seen after previous economic downturns in New York City. If you think about the very slow recovery from the early 90s recession, and even the very slow recovery from the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, even though it wasn't as severe in New York City as it was in other places, this economic event is much more severe than that. And again, it's much more severe here than it is around the country. If we don't do this right, the risk is that we'll see double-digit unemployment rates for Black and Latinx workers for several years. That's what happened throughout the 1990s. That's what happened from 2009 to 2014, basically. Again,
and how would you define doing it right, as you mentioned? What does that look like to you?
So it involves identifying the workers who are now dislocated, getting a sense of how many of those are likely to go back to the business that they came from. And if they're not, begin to think about, assess their potential and what their interest is, and try and identify a career trajectory and the training and education supports they need to be able to move into the jobs that likely will be created in New York City over the next few years. We're fortunate to have a very strong tech sector. We will see continued growth in the tech area. The healthcare sector is changing rapidly. We have some sense of where those job changes are going to occur. We need to have a massive workforce redeployment system that can connect the workers likely to lose their jobs with where the job openings are likely to be.
I'd like to come back to the subject in a little while of the ways in which various sectors were impacted differently. But I have a question I want to put to Andrew Ryan sent in by Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver is asking the mayoral candidates, do you have any experience with financial planning and large budgets? So, Andrew, there are arguably things the mayor can or can't do to stimulate the economy, but then there's also the matter of managing our, $98-99 billion New York City budget. It's really swelled under Mayor Bill de Blasio. Federal stimulus money is keeping us going for now, but we're looking at some very large deficits in the not too distant future. So what can the mayor afford to do with regard to stimulating the economy? What can't the next mayor afford to do, in your opinion?
So thank you. And thank you, Mary, for asking the question. The budget is actually $102 billion. It's up during this administration, projected to be 102 under the mayor's proposal, up $28 billion since the beginning of this administration. And the money coming from the city is up $16 billion. So it's significantly larger than it was. The strategy has to really right now is take this opportunity with, taxes coming in a little better than we had expected, because some people have actually done pretty well in this economy, despite the real devastation, 600,000 still unemployed. But with that federal money, $15.7 billion coming into New York, it's to use it wisely, spread it over time as to provide relief, stimulate recovery, and the runway to restructure government, because we still need to have it more efficient in the long run. So next mayor is going to come in and on paper has about a $5 billion budget gap. And what that means is this mayor comes in January 1st, and assuming that the current mayor's budget office projections are correct and the budget is adopted as proposed, a lot of assumptions there, the mayor comes in and 3 weeks later has a $5 billion budget gap to close. Now, maybe it's $4 billion because things are a little better in the economy or spending, but that's huge. This mayor is going to have to come in, this next mayor, and figure out how to close that budget gap through savings, through other working with labor, especially before and concurrently with funding those programs and supporting those programs that are stimulative to the economy. Now, whatever happens in this adopted budget is actually going to pave that way, because the next mayor comes in and a lot of that federal money is already either out the door or planned for. So it's going to be quite a challenge.
And Andrew, as somebody who yourself has been in the chair, having to have made decisions at places like the New York City Department of Health and the Department of Education about what to cut. You manage a $1.6 billion budget at a New York City agency. What skills should voters be looking for when they hear these candidates talking about their experience that should assure them that this person will come in ready to do that job? What skills does a mayor need?
The mayor needs the combination of vision of where the money and the programs and the quality should be, but the tenacity to hold people accountable, to get the ideas from all the agencies. The city has a long tradition before this administration of a program to eliminate the gap, getting ideas from all the agencies on how to reduce the budget, but also holding people accountable, because we know using technology, changing the way some work is done, we can actually provide the services New Yorkers need at lower cost. But the mayor needs the vision of where it should go and the tenacity to manage and hold people accountable and be diligent. And quite frankly, one of the key qualities is to pick the right people, hold them accountable, and let them do their jobs. But they have to be a decision maker, and they have to lead by example and push that decision down, saying, a dollar wasted is a New Yorker not served.
We just heard, I think it was James Parrott mention that the city needs a wage subsidy program. Forgive me, Jessica Walker, if that was you who said it. But Andrew, is a wage subsidy program something that the city can afford to do right now? And also just helping our viewers in terms of watching these candidates and what to look for. Do they need to be hearing from these candidates not only what they can do, but where they'll find the money?
First of all, I'll start where you ended, which is, this is no different than other campaigns. They're filled with promises, and you can hear the cash register, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. When they get into the office, there's a difference between campaigning and governing is about finding the money before you spend it. So I think the point about funding a wage subsidy is managing the federal aid wisely, not squandering it. I mean, there is a $250 million, cleanup corps. Is that the best use of that money? There is a proposal for property tax relief. Now, a lot of people will say, of course I need property tax relief, but it's so little for every person that there's not great relief for those who need it. And that's costing $90 million in one shot. So the question is, if you use the federal money wisely, you can find the money to do whatever the appropriate right evidence-based programs are. But if you sprinkle it around, there's a risk of wasting it and not having the impact which is needed by New Yorkers.
Funny that you should mention property tax relief, because we have quite a number of questions on that subject from our viewers. I'm going to start by reading part of a very long question from Eddie from Staten Island, but this will give you the gist. He says, my homeowner's real estate tax in my single family home on Staten Island is $1,000 a month, along with my water and sewer charges. I'm having to rethink residing in New York City, even though I'm born, raised, schooled, employed, and honorably discharged military veteran from here. I am now house rich and pocket poor. Dr. Patchett, can you tell us what is the status of this issue and what should voters be listening for? This is something we've heard mayors talk about as long as I've been covering city government, but we haven't seen it addressed.
We've had a real need for wholesale property tax reform for probably about 40 years now. So understandably, there's a lot of pent-up resentment out there about the property tax system. That's why 2 years ago, the mayor and the speaker of the city council appointed an advisory commission on property tax reform. For good or bad, I'm a member of that commission, and I can assure viewers that we have really worked hard with the staff from the finance department and the budget office and city council finance staff to really try and wrap our arms around this problem, understand it, and think about solutions to this. What needs to happen is that we have very inequitable, very differential, effective property tax rates. The amount of property taxes that a person makes relative to what the real market value of their property is. That's, there's a wide dispersion of that across the city. And it's resulted from flaws in the 1980 law passed in Albany about this. So we've tried to understand that. We've made preliminary recommendations to address that. We're in the midst of a series of borough-wide, borough-based hearings on this. We had the one in Staten Island and Brooklyn already. In a couple of weeks, we're doing Queens, the Bronx, and Manhattan. We will be issuing final recommendations before the end of this year. It probably really won't be acted on until next year, but hopefully we'll come up with a set of recommendations that elected officials at all levels in New York City can get behind. We need to make sure that the state legislature and the governor, defer and listen to what New York City officials and their voters really need in property tax reform. So we hope to be able to begin to move a serious set of recommendations to address that. We know there are serious problems out there. We're aware of those. We're developing ways to relieve those, phase in those over time, put in protections like a circuit breaker to make sure that a person's property taxes doesn't rise above a certain level of their income. Target that to people on fixed incomes and so on. By the way, Eddie is a veteran. You might be eligible for a veteran's property tax credit in New York City. You should check with your city council member or call the Department of Finance and see if you're eligible for that.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful information. Jessica Walker, Jonah Shine has sent us this question, and I wonder if it's something that you hear your business partners talking about. Maybe with the benefit of hindsight, people are looking back at that Amazon deal. Jonah Shine asks, is New York City really better or worse off now for having lost an Amazon headquarters here?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, it's a difficult situation. I think that we need jobs right now. There's no question about it. We are in a difficult spot. And we do need that recovery. I don't know that we need to rehash what happened with Amazon. I think that lots of people were disappointed, but it also, didn't go down perfectly as well. So I don't know that we need to sort of rehash that. But I think
we don't need to rehash it, though. I guess the question for the mayoral candidates is, what is their tone towards other big businesses that want to come here to create jobs? Are they going to give them the types of tax incentives that have made New York an attractive place for them to set up shop in the past?
Thank you, Melissa. That's exactly the right thing. That the next mayor really has to try to set a tone that they want businesses to be here, that they want people to come create jobs here. And I think that that's going to be very important to indicate on day one. And again, this is not, not everybody can, not every company is going to fare well in New York City. It's a tough town, but I think it really is incumbent on the next mayor to set the tone that this is, that New York City is open for business, that we do want to work with companies that want to do well and want to come and really try to train and help our workforce here and help the city succeed.
And without putting you on the spot too much, Jessica, are you at all concerned about the Democrats being, a little bit tough on corporations these days? It's not exactly popular, especially where a lot of the energy of the party is right now on the left, to be doing things to incentivize corporations.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that there has been a lot of anti-business rhetoric. This was before the COVID crisis. I think that was detrimental to the economy in a lot of ways. But I think that we're at a place where hopefully the next mayor is going to understand that we really do need to, of course, always looking towards making sure that we're taking care of New Yorkers. I mean, that has to be the first part. But it doesn't have to be a relationship that is combative. There are a lot of businesses that want to come into the city. They want to thrive, but they also want to do a lot of good for the city. And so I think, that's what we want to look for, is a mayor who understands, that's the dynamic we need to set that the city can't thrive without jobs. It just is not going to work. And so we need a mayor who understands how to strike the right balance in that way.
And while we're on the subject of the climate for businesses to thrive, despite a windfall of federal money and better than anticipated revenues, New York State voted to raise taxes last year. And so my question is, will that help or hurt the recovery of New York?
Is that to me? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Andrew. You can take it away.
I didn't know. Sorry.
I wasn't specific, but I'm happy to have you answer it.
The tax increases. So the state in its budget increased taxes, income taxes on the wealthy, leapfrogging to make New York, the combined New York State, New York City tax rate the highest in the nation. And it also increased our corporate tax, which combined the corporate franchise tax of the city, the MTA region, and the state was already the highest in the nation. Frankly, our position is that it's economically risky and fiscally was unnecessary because the state got a lot of revenue and state tax revenues were actually doing pretty well. In fact, after the budget was adopted and they weeks later and just a few weeks ago put out their report on the enacted budget, they increased their revenue estimates $4 billion a year before the tax increases. So they were unnecessary in terms of recovery and relief and stabilizing the state's finances. And there is a risk. There is a risk that high income earners, between having the highest tax in the country, between the cap on state and local tax deductions from the federal level that was enacted in the last administration, and because people have had experience telecommuting and working from away, that this is the time that could encourage people to leave New York and take their tax dollars with them. Are they going to flood out en masse? No, of course not. But does everything that stops us from creating jobs, from keeping people here who pay taxes to fund our schools, for our police, our transportation, our public health, we want to keep them here. So every obstacle that we can avoid should be avoided. And this was one that we should have avoided.
And what about this debate over whether raising taxes really does drive people out of New York? We've heard our government officials sometimes argue that it's not really a thing. Do you think it is? And then can you also address for us the impact of crime or fear of crime as a driver of people and business out of New York?
I mean, there's a healthy debate about the impact of taxes on mobility. There have been lots of bad studies and a few good studies. The few good studies show that there is some effect, but it's not necessarily very big. Certainly wealthy people have more options, but some of these studies have shown them move. There has been nothing equivalent to what we are experiencing here in New York. Nothing that talks about a SALT cap, that talks about this kind of increase, that talks about a pandemic where people have worked and run businesses and been successful out of New York. So I think that there have been studies. There is some evidence of mobility. It is small, but there's reason to believe that this is much different situation and is a higher risk. And as I said, unnecessary.
Though it is also worth noting that the mayor has very little control over the vast majority of taxes that impact its residents, that most of those are state controlled. I want to go to the subject I mentioned earlier, which was the impact of crime. What sense do you have that fear of crime and that recent increases in crime will impact the city's economic recovery? Jessica, can we start with you?
It's the biggest issue we're hearing right now from our business members. I think there is the reality of the problem, and then there's also the perception, right? New York is the media capital of the world. So when somebody is shot in Times Square, that is, shown to the world. And so we need to get this under control. Of course, everybody, I think we also have our perspective about it. We're still, our city is still safer than most big cities in the nation. And certainly we have not gone back to the 1990s. But this is something we need to nip in the bud. It really is going to undermine our economic recovery if we do not address it. And I think it's absolutely, there's no question about it, this is one of the top issues in the mayoral debate.
James Parrott, you have expertise in labor. Can you give us your analysis of why some workers were so devastated by the pandemic while others were left relatively unscathed. And I'm asking not only about the disparities between workers in different sectors, but also the disparate impact on New Yorkers of different races. What should we be listening for as we evaluate the various proposals of the candidates who want to be mayor?
There needs to be an understanding that the COVID-related economic downturn and impact was completely different from what we're used to seeing in a business cycle downturn. Business cycle downturn often hits, some of the high-paying industries, finance, professional services, law firms, and so on. And then when those people lose their jobs and incomes, their, reduced spending power then, result in fewer jobs in the sector of the economy producing for, local neighborhood services and consumer goods and services and so on. So, but it's more evenly felt, the job dislocation. The COVID impact was much different than that. It was as lopsided as anything you can imagine. It hit really hard at the face-to-face service industries like hospitality, local retailing, neighborhood services, nail salons, and so on. It obviously devastated the arts sector. We have a lot of performing arts in New York City. Those were shut down. So it had a disproportionate impact on certain industries that happened to be overwhelmingly populated with people of color. The wages in those industries tend to be lower. Many people are paid on an hourly basis. So if they're not working, they don't get paid. Many jobs in the face-to-face service industries and in industries like construction and manufacturing can't be done remotely. That part of the economy, fortunate enough to work in industries like finance and professional services and information that could pivot and work remotely, actually, fared much better. They were inconvenienced, certainly, but not very many people lost their jobs or benefits and so on. They had to adapt to working from home, but they still have a job and had a paycheck and all of that. So it's had a really lopsided impact. And one of the contributors to the deterioration in the public safety environment is that we have a lot of people unemployed, a lot of people uncertain what their economic future is, a lot of anxiety that's been caused by personal losses and the health risks that people have been exposed to during this. This is a very unsettling time, and candidates need to have a sensitivity to that, and need to understand that we really need to make sure that we get as many people reconnected with jobs, that we retain as many of the businesses that are out there now struggling to hang on as possible. And as I said before, that we really need to, understanding that some workers won't be able to go back to jobs that don't exist anymore because those businesses already closed their doors, to identify their skills, help them gain new skills so that they can be equipped to take jobs that will grow in the future.
And at the same time, we have businesses who are saying they're having a hard time inducing their workers to return to the job. Can you talk a little bit, Dr. Parrott, while I have you, about the reasons for that? And I'm not necessarily talking about fear of crime, but perhaps the economic ability to stay at home now that people are getting enhanced unemployment benefits. How is a mayor to address that piece of the problem?
Well, I think number one, again, this is such an unsettled time. I think the public health risk that we've all been living with now for 14 or 15 months is number one on many people's minds. So that really speaks to the importance of making sure that as many people get vaccinated as possible, and that people's sense of comfort in dealing with a reopened social scene and work life is as conducive as possible to renewed interaction. So the public health is really important. Beyond that, we have to understand, I've been looking at this question. It's obviously been a big question on a lot of people's minds. We have a childcare sector that's still operating at 75% of the capacity that it was before. And believe me, we had a crisis in the affordability and accessibility of childcare before the pandemic, and it's much worse now. So that's obviously a factor in keeping a lot of parents home from work. We also have, it's a very wonky thing, but there are flaws in the way the state's unemployment insurance system handles people to go back to work on a part-time basis. We have a very flawed system. There's been a lot of thought given to how to improve that. I think we're about to see reform legislation pass in the remaining days of the Albany session that will improve that, and some of that needs to be implemented right away. So there are many things that need to be done, but I think above all, the most important thing is to get the public health situation under control and reassure people that New York City is safe to visit and a safe place to do business and go back to work.
Thank you. Jessica, I know that you live in Harlem and you represent Manhattan businesses as part of the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce. We have a question here that has to do with affordable housing, and I think I'm going to direct it to you. The question comes from Mary. It's really a question that she wants to hear the candidates answer, but Mary asks, how do you plan to create real affordable housing for the poor and middle class? Affordable housing under Bloomberg was a joke. This is Mary saying this, especially when his administration put the median income in Harlem at $80,000. I don't know if that's exactly what the number was, but she's making the point that it was too high. She says that Harlem residents most made only about $40,000 or $50,000. So Harlem and other low-income communities can no longer live in their neighborhood. Is there a sense of just dwindling of affordability and an inability to sort of overcome that in this post-pandemic phase?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. So this is, again, the longevity of our city. We have to think about who is the city for? How are we going to be able to ensure that New Yorkers can stay here and New Yorkers want to be here? We have to think about maintaining the city as a competitive city. If we have, through the pandemic, so many companies have allowed workers to work remotely for obvious reasons. And many people have gone to other places and that's where they want to be. We cannot, this is New York City. We cannot rest on our laurels. We have to say, this is our competitive advantage. And so we have to continue to strive. We need to bring down the commute times, which are so high in the city. We need to address the affordability crisis in housing and just how expensive it can be to live in the city. These are the things we need to do to continue to attract the best talent, to make this the best city and an affordable city for all New Yorkers. There's no question about it. It's critical to our longevity.
Andrew, is there anything you want to add on the subject of housing?
It's interesting. We did a study looking at how we could increase the production of housing of all types in New York City. Because one of the things about housing affordability is we actually are producing less housing than our competitor cities of all different types. We can see these super towers and it seems like, oh, look, we're only building one type of housing. But if you look in the big picture, we in the city and frankly in the region have been producing less housing, and that becomes a constraint and that hurts affordability. So we need to figure out what are the strategies and the policies, and that's what we need to hear the mayoral candidates, because it's not just affordable housing policy, it is a housing production policy. James is on the Property Tax Commission. Property tax reform can help actually produce more, encourage people to develop more housing, which will help all. We need to develop housing around the city. We need to plan for that growth and we need to zone for that growth. And we need to let it happen on transportation or transportation corridors throughout the city in all different types of neighborhoods. Then we can look at how we can have an affordability mix that is self-sufficient. The private sector is the one who's going to create most of the housing. The question is how to make it affordable, how to have the mix of growth, market rate, affordability at the levels people need. and more housing will become more affordable housing. Plus, there is an Albany agenda that our next mayor should be thinking about going to Albany to remove obstacles that are in regulation in Albany that stop us from producing housing. I won't get as wonky with my friend James here, but Florida area ratios and the scaffold law, things that constrain housing development, constrain housing affordability.
Thanks, Andrew. Before we wrap up, I guess I'd love to ask you each to tell us how can we be educated consumers as we head into this final debate and these final couple of weeks before the primary. We have candidates promising to create 100,000 jobs here, 500,000 jobs there. What do voters need to know about what a mayor actually can do and about how dire the fiscal situation really is to help them to make responsible choices about, who their next mayor should be and what is realistic that they'll be able to accomplish? Let's start with you, Jessica.
Well, I think we are in a crisis. There's no question about it. We've all come out of a pandemic, personally and as a city. We need somebody who is prepared and who can hit the ground running. So whether that means their own experience or that they can hire very well and know how to get the job done, I think that's the biggest thing. I think what to watch for is not necessarily, a plan to create jobs, but a plan to work with the private sector, to work with the human services sector, to really be able to pull all of the different sectors together in the city, because everything we need is here to get the job done. But it's somebody who can really bring everybody together and has that vision. Andrew said that, who has that vision to really push the city forward. That's what we need right now.
Andrew, what should we be skeptical about when we hear these proposals? What does the educated voter need to know?
The educated voter should have their ear attuned to something that sounds too good to be true. It's not much different than the rest of life. Someone who's saying something that's probably too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. So you need to think about someone who's talking about, I am going to have that vision of leading together. And Jessica's exactly right. And even going back to James talking about job training, bringing business together with the workforce training, people to figure out what jobs are needed, what training is needed. So who's going to lead together? And then they need to be talking about how they're going to manage the budget, how they're going to manage the city, and how they're going to help the economy grow. And you have to look at the package, because if people are only saying, look over here at the shiny things and not the hard things, it might be too good to be true.
Dr. Parrott, do you have anything to add?
So I would say that to tell whether or not somebody really has a handle on the economic challenges, do they believe that the economy is just going to snap back, that it's only a matter of time and businesses are going to reopen, people will go back to work and so on? There needs to be an understanding that COVID has accelerated rapidly ongoing changes in the economy, and we're facing a situation unlike what we faced before, where we need to skill a substantial number of workers for different jobs. So that's number one. Number two, I think people are, as others have said, everybody, has higher expectations about capable management. And this is a big city. We have a large government. We depend heavily. We live so close together in this dense environment. We depend upon really effective and cost-efficient service delivery. People want to know how you're going to do that. One person can't do it by themselves. How can they demonstrate to us that they're going to be able to identify and attract capable managers to the city? And then how are they going to manage the managers? I think that's big. That's a big unknown. And on property taxes, it would be good to identify, for candidates to tell us exactly what the problems are, how they're going to fix them, and how. And importantly, because good ideas alone won't carry the day unless we can get them enacted in Albany, how are they going to mobilize political support in Albany to do the things that New York City needs Albany to do?
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
No, I was agreeing with everything James just said, per usual.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean, I think that's right. I think the next mayor does, I think you're right, that a big part of what's going to need to happen under the next mayor is how are they going to get some changes out of Albany? And we've seen Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo not working so great together. So I think that is a dynamic we should also be thinking about.
Okay. Well, we are just about out of time. I want to thank all our terrific panelists. This has been a really enlightening discussion. I know it's been helpful to me as we prepare for the debates. Hopefully it's been informative for our viewers. And before we go, we do want to talk about the city's new voting system. When you vote in the race for New York City mayor on June 22nd, it's going to be different. For starters, the primaries are coming up much sooner. As I mentioned, June 22nd this year. It's not in September anymore. You'll also see some very big changes in the way you cast your ballot.
New York City has a new voting system that lets voters say more about their preferences. It's called ranked choice voting, and here's how it works. As always, you pick your first choice, but what's different now? You can also list your second choice, third choice, even your fourth and fifth choices. After the polls close, round one begins. Voters' first place choices are tallied. If one candidate wins more than 50% of the first place votes, they win. It's over. But if no candidate gets a true majority, then the candidate in last place is eliminated, and voters who had put that losing candidate first have their second choices counted instead, and then added to the totals. The process continues in rounds until someone gets over 50%. The new system spares taxpayers the cost of holding a second runoff election in crowded races when votes are split too many ways to have a clear winner. Some say it'll force politicians to be less divisive and work harder for broader appeal. Because while a candidate may not be every voter's first choice, being some voters' second or third choice could come in handy.
And for more information about ranked choice voting and voting in general, the New York City Campaign Finance Board has a lot of online resources. You can find them by going to voting.nyc. And a reminder, News 4, along with our partners, will be hosting 2 debates ahead of the June 22nd primary. The first Democratic mayoral candidates debate will be on Wednesday, June 16th at 7 p.m. And the Democrats vying for the job of city controller will also debate each other on Sunday, June 20th. This fall, NBC4 and our partners will also be hosting candidates for a general election debate on October 20th. That's all the time we have. We want to thank our panelists and thank everybody else for joining us, and we'll see you at the debate on June 16th. Have a great night.